Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Todd McLean.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much, and can I thank colleagues for their contribution to the debate so far. I think it is a respectful debate and a very, very useful one, and I think anybody listening in will be enjoying it, because this is very much the way that this House should conduct discussions about trade more directly. I want to go through a few of the points that have been raised by colleagues around this, but before I do, I think, Mr. Speaker, I want to very much speak in favour and in support of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement as negotiated and signed, and certainly pay a very big compliment to the previous Trade Minister, Tim Grosser, for over 7 years having negotiated against what many people said would not be possible, and actually reaching agreement with 11 other countries who represent 800 million consumers, almost 40% of the world's economy, spending $27 trillion of GDP every year, and unprecedented access for New Zealanders, New Zealand goods and New Zealand services to these very important markets to us. And I guess I would argue the only country for which we have better access to through a comprehensive free trade agreement would be Australia through CER, something that's been in place for so very, very many years. It is pleasing, Mr. Chair, to hear from members that they do support trade and recognise the importance of trade to New Zealand. You know, we're a country of 4.5 million people that can produce an area of food alone to feed 40 million people. And I wonder if not for our ability to sell internationally, whether generally we would run out of things to do after about March in the year, but without preferential access, or in many cases just fairer access to countries because of FTAs, whether or not around about February, about the time this Parliament comes back to start work, the economy would run out of things to do. And I do want to pay credit to the previous government in starting the negotiation, and Phil Goff actually starting the negotiation of the Chinese Free Trade Agreement, because that's been exceptionally important to New Zealand over the last 8 years since it's been in place. And the China Free Trade Agreement is very similar to TPP in as far as it is a comprehensive free trade agreement. Mr. Robinson mentioned that this is more than just around liberalisation of tariff schedules, and he's correct, it is. But actually it's been quite some period of time since New Zealand, or any other country really, has gone out and negotiated a trade agreement just based on tariff lines and tariff schedules. And actually it's very important for us, our economy, that we are more ambitious than that. And the reason for this is we're not only a country that produces goods and sells them overseas. We are a country that also now provides services increasingly, significantly around the world. We're also a country now who invests overseas, and so on and so forth. So it is important, I think, that our agreements are comprehensive, but it is also important that they deliver for all parts of our economy. I do want to say, when it comes to consultation and engagement, it's been said before, I'll repeat it, but this was a widely consulted on free trade agreement. Now, some of the people that were consulted in the very early days, I accept it was 7 or 8 years ago, and it's a very long period of time, but I asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to have a look for me to make sure, when I stood up in public in one of the more than 50 meetings I did around the country, or part of the 18 roadshow and hui that we did up and down New Zealand, including more when people asked us to do them, to talk about the agreement, to explain it, to go through it with them. I asked MFAT to make sure that it had been widely consulted on, and I was informed it was, and I accept that it was. But what I would say, Mr. Chair, is since becoming Minister and since having signed this agreement, I do believe and accept there is a difference between consultation and engagement. And I think that's quite important. And so I've been talking a lot about a trade policy strategy refresh that we're working through now. And that is very much about to engage as well as consult. And so with members of this House, I would be very keen to find better ways to do this going forward. But I do believe even if we had engaged differently, consulted differently, it would have been hard to consult more. But if we had done that, I don't think we would have had a different outcome or come to this House with a different agreement than TPP, because I do believe it delivers for us. We heard Ms Wood said that dairy was a big loser in this. And yes, it is fair to say, well, if it wasn't a big winner, that's almost the same as, I guess, saying it's a big loser, because others have. However, All right. So, Mr. Chair, so I will accept, Mr. Chair, I will accept, therefore, that the All Blacks weren't big winners the other day when they played rugby. But in this instance, I think dairy did do very well. So yes, it is correct that we didn't get full liberalisation of the dairy access to other countries. It is also correct that we got lower tariff rates and new quotas into a number of those countries, which means that we do have better access now than we did in the past, and we do have the ability in the future to keep challenging and look for more from this at some stage in the future with our trading partners. However, Mr. Chair, dairy is one of the most heavily protected industries in the world. It's certainly very heavily subsidised, and New Zealand always goes to argue for a fairer deal from our farmers into these markets. But of current trade volumes or flows by value into TPP nations, when fully enforced, there will be a $274 million tariff saving. Dairy is almost $100 million of that. And actually, to our dairy farmers, that will be quite welcome. Now, is that enough? Do we think people should continue to liberalise? Do we actually want to see less protection of dairy around the world? Absolutely we do. Do we believe there should be less, if not no subsidy in dairy and other agricultural products around the world? Absolutely we do. And we go and argue that in our FTA negotiations. We argue that in the WTO. But, Mr. Chair, an almost $100 million saving for dairy on current trade values, I think is significant. But what we also see in TPP is some areas where there was full liberalisation around dairy, not as a commodity, but as a product where we add value. So into the US, for instance, if you want to sell cheese or add value to milk products here, a little bit of sugar, some flavour, maybe some kiwi fruit, and you want to sell that to US as ice cream, in many areas there is full liberalisation, and so there are opportunities for New Zealanders to add value to products here, export them overseas, creating and protecting more jobs in New Zealand and actually growing our share of trade. And a total $274 million of tariff savings on our current trade values, not taking into account any extra trade that we will do as a result of this. That is a win for New Zealand, and I think it's a big win. I think those tariff savings will be greater because in many cases we will end up selling much, much more. I will take a call later in this discussion to go into more detail, but I just wanted to address something that Mrs. King said, because I think it's very important. And we have paid a lot of attention to patent term extensions. And she's correct that if we had to just extend patents automatically or just because other countries wanted us to, there would be a cost to New Zealanders. But in the text from the regulatory impact statement that she read, she was probably a touch selective in that, because if she went on a bit further, it says, it does show that the government has been consistently clear that the patent term extension provisions of TPP are likely to have very limited impact in New Zealand. And this is because IPONs and MedSafe are already very efficient, amongst the most efficient regulators in the TPP. And so what this means is if there is an unreasonable delay, then that period of delay which is unreasonable can be tagged on to the end by way of an extension. And the analysis says that is not likely to happen very much at all. Well, so how that will be defined is that Pharmac are going to go away, do some work, and they will set some regulations around this. But ultimately, we've agreed that because it was important to some of our other partners, but there will be TPP countries where the delays are very, very long, many, many years long. And so, for reasons of transparency and fairness, this was agreed, but the impact upon New Zealand will be negligible, and indeed, I think Pharmac have said about $1 million a year, including some of the work they have to do to comply. And the final part in this was what Mr. Tabito said around other parts of Pharmac and what they would do. Well, Pharmac has said that they, in as far as there are two changes only to Pharmac, that there will have to be a review process for any declined application. Not a problem with that, because actually, just as people took a case to the Waitangi Tribunal under TPP to make sure that the government was meeting its obligation to iwi, to Māori under the TPP exclusion, it is right that if something is declined, there is the opportunity for judicial review. The only other change is that FAMAC can set the time frame that they will make a decision, and they're currently consulting on this and proposing 3 years. So they can make a decision over 3 years. If it's turned down, that somebody can appeal the decline, but there is no need for them to have to change their position. I'll speak more on the debate later, Mr. Chair.